Back in 1997 or so, I was going through my spiritual awakening and it was really intense. I felt guided to move from Arizona to California, and I ended up living. Uh, First, I was subleasing a home on UC Santa Cruz's campus from some students that were going to be away for a while, a married couple, I guess, and so it was furnished, and it was it was a really beautiful area near the ocean, and I was starting to really figure out synchronicity. That was one of the things that was big during my awakening, because up until then there was coincidence in life, but none of it was meaningful coincidence. I could explain it away by random uh, logic, using the logic of randomness and so forth. But there's a lot of intense things. So I was interpreting how the universe could communicate to me through tarot cards, through arrangements of letters on license plates, other kind of music occurrences on the radio, things that were aligned with what was happening. And it was really blowing my mind. And so I just was going through an intense period of trying to integrate all this, because up until that point, I had been an atheist. And so the lid was being blown off my previously held views of how the world worked. And during that time period, I decided that I wanted to have God speak to me through text, or through words, I think was how I put it. And what I thought at the time, because this was during the beginning of when I was getting into the internet and so forth, and I was getting spam, and I thought that maybe there'd be some piece of spam that was, random, but had some meaning to me. I didn't really know, I guess, what I was getting into, but I basically went through some kind of process of driving out near the ocean. I was in some field, and I made this earnest request for God to speak to me through using words instead of just all these various other signs and symbols and synchronicities. I wanted to be communicated with through words. So, probably within the next week or so, I was up, and I know it was a Saturday night because I had just finished watching Saturday Night Live. The last skit was about submarine, something to do with the ocean. And around that time, I started flipping through channels, and every channel that I flipped through on the TV, on cable, had to do with water, fish. I remember one of the shows that I flipped to was The Incredible Mr. Limpet, which I related to, about a guy who never fit into the regular world and only felt at home when he became a fish, and was an partially animated film. And anyways, it was just really strange. And I'd had other strange things, watch TV and flip into channels at certain times, stuff like that. But everything I flipped through just seemed to have something to do with the ocean, fish, other kinds of aquatic type themes. So I was getting a little tripped out and started to feel a little nervous. And then I got to a channel that was just black. It was just blank. And then some white words came on the screen. It said, "Are you sure you really want to know this?" or something like that. And I was like, "Oh, this is it. This is God speaking to me through words like I asked for. This is trippy." And I felt just very gripped. And part of me wanted to turn away. Part of me wanted to see what was going to happen next. The words disappeared, went to a black screen again. And then it was like something about the meaning of life, or something to that effect came up, and then ... and then it's like black again, and then white words come up. "Are you sure you want to see this?" And then so of course, I'm thinking this is a really intense mystical experience, and I am excited, but I'm afraid too. So that goes on, this little period of words coming up on the screen of "Are you sure?" and that kind of thing like that. I think I'm kind of probably breathing with anxiety, pretty heavy and all that stuff like that. And then it comes up with something like the meaning of life relates to fishing. Now, of course, all these other channels I had seen as I flipped through were related to fish and the ocean and things like that and so forth. So when these words came up, that was pretty trippy. And then I think I just turned off the TV, and I was just like, my heart was racing, and I was like, I'm not ready for words. I'm not ready for words. And I kind of paced back and forth and just really felt like I was tripping out. And I called somebody. I called a person I knew who had been through some intense mystical experiences herself, out-of-body stuff and just other things. And then I felt really calm. I was talking with her, and it just really seemed to soothe me. And it was just kind of like, okay, yeah, trippy things happen and so forth. And I think that maybe the next day, or maybe later that night even, I found out that channel that I'd turned to was like a public access channel. And of course, public access can have anything on it. So even if something feels like a mystical experience, a lot of times there's a real world version of what's going on too. And so it's not like a hallucination or anything like that. It's just like there was some public access show, and that happened to be on at that time, and there happened to be these various other coincidences with related to fishing and ocean and so forth. So, but once things settled down, I thought, what does this mean to me? And because when we have experiences, no matter how they manifest, we try to make sense of them in different ways. So I felt that this series of synchronicities, coincidences, whatever you want to call them, were standing out in my experience to pay attention to a kind of Taoist perspective, which is reflected by fishing as opposed to hunting. I think of hunting as being an active kind of pursuit, whereas fishing is more passive. And so I've often thought about the meaning of fishing throughout my life in terms of relationships, not trying to force finding relationships, for example, but letting them happen, keeping your bait on the hook in the water, so to speak, in terms of, not completely isolating so you can't find anybody, but just having that more fishing attitude of what do you catch, what do you find. And then also it has turned out to have meaning in my work, doing business on the internet and attracting clients is kind of like fishing, trying to find where they are, and then when they make a purchase, that's like a catch and so forth, but it's still somewhat of a passive activity compared to a lot of types of work and so forth. So I've construed meaning from the series of events, but at the time it was very intense. And so, I've learned from this experience we can have powerful experiences with the universe if we ask for them and we feel that we're ready for them. I also feel that synchronicity, although it's kind of like background music in my life, so to speak, that like I literally, in terms of music, can connect a lot of times what songs come on randomly to some inner thought process I've been having or some life situation. I can make a lot of connections. But really intense experiences aren't that frequent. And that one that I just described to you with asking God to speak to me in words, that was about over 14 years now ago. And since then, I've found out a lot about who I am. And I think that when we don't know who we are, because at that time I'd been living in terms of socialized kind of behaviors and family values and just trying to fit into the world as opposed to getting in touch with who I really was. So there's a lot that needed to be cracked open. And I think that when people haven't really been living their authentic life, then synchronicity and other kinds of intense experiences in the spiritual realm can be more intense because we need to be kind of cracked open. But then as we become closer to who we really are, then they're not quite as intense. Sometimes we still need, kind of like eye-opening experience, but a lot of times synchronicity just is more of an ongoing reminder that there is something going on that is more mysterious than the everyday world, and that there is guidance available. There's also a kind of ongoing mirroring of the universe between what we're thinking, feeling, and what is being mirrored back to us about ourselves and our thought process as well. So that's my story about how I asked God to speak to me in words and what that seemed to bring upon myself. Thanks for listening.